My life has unfolded through a series of unexpected events and fortunate encounters. Losing my parents at a young age was devastating, yet fate smiled on me when the elderly Parkers next door embraced me as if I were their grandchild. They provided a home filled with immense love and warmth, though not much wealth, which was more than enough for me. As I grew up and reached the age of 19, ready to explore college opportunities, tragedy struck again. The Parkers passed away in a sudden car accident. Suddenly, I found myself alone once more. They left me a modest sum for my education and their suburban house, a quaint and memory-filled abode. However, it felt too haunted by the past for me to remain, so I sold it and moved into a small apartment in the city, close to the college where I pursued a degree in financial management. College was challenging yet engaging, and I dedicated myself to mastering the intricacies of finance and markets. After graduation, I secured a decent job where my days were filled with activity. Yet, the city nights felt strangely lonely despite the crowds. That loneliness faded when I met Saint at a friend's gathering. He was outgoing, humorous, and effortlessly charming. Our first interaction was memorable. He accidentally spilled my drink, and in his straightforward, carefree manner, quickly offered to replace it. We connected instantly, finding common ground in our shared interests and easy conversations. A year into our relationship, Saint proposed in the most understated yet perfect way for us. No grand gestures, just him, me, and a ring clumsily presented during a quiet evening at home. Our marriage didn't alter much in our lives. It simply solidified the bond we already cherished. We continued to live in my city apartment, now sharing the serene moments together. Life seemed wonderfully stable, and soon, I found another family in Saint's parents, the Tysons. They were warm and welcoming, making me feel loved and appreciated from the start. We enjoyed weekends filled with laughter, barbecues, and cozy coffee chats at their home. However, life has its way of challenging us when least expected. Saint had to leave for a year-long business assignment out of state, which coincided with a sudden decline in Mr. Tyson's health. Mrs. Tyson's distress during this tough time was palpable, and I felt compelled to support them as much as I could, even in Saint's absence. The cycle of support and love continued, showing that while life can be unpredictable and challenging, the connections we make can offer profound comfort and resilience. Without hesitation, I packed my bags and headed to the suburbs after receiving the call from Mrs. Tyson. Her voice was laden with emotion as she explained that Tyson, her husband, was severely ill. When I arrived and saw Mr. Tyson looking so fragile and connected to numerous medical devices, it was a stark contrast to the strong, steady man I remembered. I quickly adapted to the rhythm of their household, taking over the cooking and cleaning duties so Mrs. Tyson could devote her energy to caring for Tyson. In the evenings, I would sit by Mr. Tyson's side, reading aloud from his favorite classic novels, although he often fell asleep before I finished a chapter. On his better days, he would weakly thank me, his voice barely a whisper of its usual strength. One afternoon, as I was preparing dinner, Mrs. Tyson joined me in the kitchen looking visibly distressed and much older than her years. She confessed that they were facing financial difficulties since Tyson had been the main breadwinner. She hesitantly suggested that I could help by renting out my apartment in the city. Without a second thought, I agreed to help alleviate their burden. The apartment was rented out quickly, and I began sending the rental income to Mrs. Tyson, along with additional funds to cover groceries and other bills. The commute to my job in the city turned arduous, but I reminded myself that family supports each other, a mantra I held on to even during the toughest days. Mrs. Tyson frequently expressed her gratitude, calling me a godsend. I reassured her that it's simply what family does. Yet, some nights, as I lay in the guest room listening to distant city sirens, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Saint's phone calls were my only solace, his voice connecting me to a different life. He would check in on me, always concerned, but I kept my tone cheerful to avoid adding to his worries. Life in the Tyson household became even more complicated when Joanna, Mrs. Tyson's daughter from a previous marriage, arrived unexpectedly. Her presence was chilling, like a cold draft sneaking under a door. Joanna had a distant and strained relationship with Mr. Tyson, and her sudden appearance added tension to an already stretched situation. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, Mr. Tyson motioned for me to come closer. His voice was hoarse and urgent as he warned me about Joanna, describing her as untrustworthy. I assured him that I would be cautious, though I wasn't entirely sure of the specifics of the threat he perceived. True to Mr. Tyson's warnings, Joanna quickly began to assert her influence, altering the dynamics of the household as if she had every right to do so. Her actions made it clear that she intended to stay and take control, which added a new layer of stress to my already heavy load. One morning, I encountered Joanna in the kitchen, her presence casting a shadow like a storm cloud over the breakfast nook. With a sharp tone and a dismissive glance, she made her intentions clear. "Just so we're clear, I'm not here to play housemaid or chef for anyone," she stated bluntly, sipping her coffee and eyeing me as though I was an unwanted guest in her mother's kitchen. Taken aback yet striving to maintain harmony, I responded calmly, "Okay, Joanna, I've been managing things so far, and I can continue to do so." "Good, because I don't plan on lifting a finger. This is Mom's house, after all," she retorted, her gaze challenging me to contradict her. From that day forward, Joanna's presence became increasingly burdensome. She would order takeout just for herself and her mother, carelessly leaving the empty containers for me to clean up. Her disdain was palpable, and although it stung, I endured it for the sake of Mr. Tyson's peace. One evening, Mrs. Tyson, reminiscent of her former kindness, invited me to join them for dinner. Before I could accept, Joanna interjected sharply, "Mom, Maeve's been busy all day. She probably prefers eating later." Her tone was laced with feigned concern, but the underlying message was clear: I was not welcome. As days passed, my responsibilities seemed to double under Joanna's reign of entitlement. I would often hear her late at night, whispering with her mother, sowing seeds of discord against me. Gradually, Mrs. Tyson's demeanor cooled, her gratitude less frequent, and her expressions more reserved. When Mr. Tyson passed away, the funeral was a subdued gathering, with Saint returning just in time to bid his father farewell. The comfort of having him by my side during such a sorrowful time was a significant relief. Yet, amidst the mourning, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere at the Tyson residence. Joanna displayed exceptional politeness, a stark contrast to her usual demeanor. "How's everything been while I've been gone?" Saint asked during a quiet moment after the service. "Fine. Everything's been fine," I lied, masking my true feelings with a forced smile, unwilling to burden him further amidst his grief. "You sure? You look a bit worn out," he pressed, his concern evident. "It's just been busy, helping out around here," I reassured him, avoiding his gaze. It wasn't the time to discuss the underlying turmoil. As soon as Saint departed, Joanna reverted to her true self, the pretense of a dutiful sister discarded for a sneering, dismissive attitude. The household dynamics shifted dramatically. Mrs. Tyson, possibly overwhelmed by her grief, grew distant and cold. Commands replaced the warm conversations we once had, making me feel more like an intruder than a family member. Joanna assumed control of the household, acting as though she were the lady of the manor. Her reign was characterized by a complete disregard for anyone's feelings but her own. She began intruding into my room without permission, rummaging through my belongings as if searching for hidden treasures. One afternoon, seeking solace in the garden, I stumbled upon a box hidden among the shrubs. Curiosity piqued. I opened it to find my watches, jewelry, and even some personal items. Nearby, several of my dresses were carelessly draped over a bush. A surge of fury overwhelmed me as I gathered my belongings, clutching the box tightly. I stormed into the living room, finding Joanna sprawled on the couch as if she owned everything around her. "What the hell, Joanna?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "You can't just throw my stuff outside." Joanna's laugh cut through the tension, a cold and harsh sound that seemed to mock my distress. "Live here? Please, you're just a guest, and not a welcome one. You should be out in the garden or better yet on the street. You're nothing but a ruthless beggar anyway." Her words were like salt on an open wound, and I was stunned by the venom in her voice. Trembling, I turned to Mrs. Tyson, who had just walked into the room, hoping for some support. "Mrs. Tyson, please, tell her she can't treat me like this. This is supposed to be my home too," I pleaded, my voice cracking under the emotional strain. Mrs. Tyson, once a figure of kindness and warmth, now looked through me as if I were invisible. "This is Joanna's house now," she stated flatly. "She's right, Maeve. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." Her words hit me like a physical blow, and I stood there, box in hand, heart-shattering. Despite the crushing betrayal, I stayed, clinging to a promise I made to Mr. Tyson on his deathbed, to look after his wife and not let Joanna overpower her. But as days passed, Mrs. Tyson seemed to adopt Joanna's cruel demeanor, her words turning sharp and her gaze cold. "You're just sitting on your hands here, aren't you?" Mrs. Tyson snapped one evening as I cleaned up after dinner. Her voice was thick with disdain. "I'm doing my best to keep things running smoothly," I replied, struggling to keep my composure amid the hurt her words caused. "Best? Could have fooled me. Seems like you're just freeloading," she scoffed before turning away and leaving the room. Her accusations stung deeply. Far from freeloading, I had rented out my apartment and transferred nearly all of that income to her, on top of handling most of the housework, while Joanna did nothing but criticize. Joanna, living comfortably off her mother's pension, was relentless in her taunts. "Really? What did my brother even see in you?" She would mock me night after night, her voice carrying easily through the thin walls. I swallowed the anger and frustration, reminding myself of the promise I made to Mr. Tyson. But the atmosphere was suffocating, a minefield of hostility. One evening, coming home early from work, my world tilted on its axis. I walked in to hear Joanna and Mrs. Tyson in the middle of a heated discussion in the living room, not noticing my arrival. "We need to get her to sell that apartment of hers. You know how much we could use that money," Joanna was saying, her tone greedy and calculating. "Yes, but how do we convince her?" "Maeve's no fool. She won't just hand it over," Mrs. Tyson replied, her voice a mix of frustration and greed. "Leave it to me, Mom. I'll sweet-talk her into it. Once she signs it over, we can finally live the way we deserve," Joanna plotted. Hearing them scheme to strip me of my only financial security was a chilling dose of reality. Fear gripped me. I knew I couldn't stay any longer. My heart pounding, I slipped away to my room unnoticed, their plotting echoing in my ears. I hurriedly packed my essentials, my hands shaking with every fold and stow. Every second in that house now felt like a countdown to disaster. I didn't bother with goodbyes. They didn't deserve them. Slipping out the back door, I made my escape, leaving behind the house that was no longer a home. I ordered a taxi and soon found myself on a train heading to Saint State. Doubts clouded my mind. Would Saint understand my sudden departure, or would he take their side? The uncertainty was overwhelming, but the fear of what could happen if I stayed behind was even more daunting. As the train sped away, the landscape outside the window blurred, mirroring the mix of fear and resolve in my heart. Arriving at Saint's place, I was a bundle of nerves. His expression was a mix of shock and relief as he opened the door to find me on his doorstep, bag in hand, visibly upset. "Maeve, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" he asked, stepping aside to let me in. "No, Saint, everything's not okay." "Not at all," I managed to say, my voice catching. He led me to the couch, his face etched with concern.
"Talk to me, babe."
"What happened?" I poured out everything: Joanna's return, the escalating tensions at home, the financial schemes, and the last straw, their plot to make me sell my apartment. I had kept it all to myself, not wanting to burden him with additional stress while he was away working. With each word, Saint's expression grew darker. By the time I finished, his fists were clenched, and his jaw was set hard. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" he asked, his voice a blend of anger and concern. "I didn't want to cause more trouble. I thought I could handle it," I admitted, feeling somewhat foolish now. "Maeve, damn it, you shouldn't have to handle anything like that alone," he exploded, standing up to pace the room. I can't believe my mom and Joanna would treat you this way. He stopped and fixed me with an intense look. I'm not letting anyone treat my wife like that, no way, he declared, pulling out his phone. My heart pounded as he dialed his mother's number. The phone barely rang twice before she picked up. I couldn't hear her words, but Saint's tense shoulders spoke volumes. Mom, this has to stop. I know about everything, and I won't tolerate it. If Joanna doesn't leave, and if you don't start treating Maeve with respect, you can forget about us helping out anymore. No more money, no more nothing, Saint said firmly, leaving no room for argument. After a brief but fiery exchange, there was silence. Saint's hand tightened around the phone. Fine, if that's your choice, then you've made mine, he said finally and hung up. He turned to me, his expression softening. Looks like it's just us now, babe. That's all we need, he said, coming over to wrap me in his arms. I leaned into him, the safety of his embrace fortifying me against the whirlwind of emotions. Just us, I murmured, feeling the truth of his words. We were on our own now, but somehow that felt okay. Saint and I talked long into the night. We discussed practical warners like my arrangements for remote work and our financial plans without the extra burden of supporting his mother and Joanna. It felt like we were laying the foundations for a new chapter, just the two of us. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You and me against the world, right? Saint said with a determined grin. Right, I smiled back, feeling more confident with him by my side. Over the next few days, we were a whirlwind of activity. I contacted my job to arrange remote work, which they thankfully agreed to. Saint helped me move my things from storage and set up a home office in the corner of his living room. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. A week into our newfound peace, I was startled by a call that felt like an echo from a past life. It was Mrs. Tyson, and her voice, which once sounded sweet, now carried a mix of desperation and audacity. Maeve, why haven't I received the money for this month? You know we depend on it, she demanded from the start. I was taken aback, silent for a moment at her nerve. I'm sorry, but after everything, you really expect me to continue supporting you? I asked, my tone more incredulous than angry. In the background, I could hear Joanna's shrill and angry voice. She's just an ungrateful girl. Mom, make her transfer the money. Taking a deep breath to calm my rising anger, I remembered the venomous words they had thrown at me, words that stung deep. Mrs. Tyson, Joanna called me a ruthless beggar, remember? I'm not sending money to people who treat me like trash. I'm done. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost picture Mrs. Tyson's shocked face. But we're family, she finally said, her voice a mix of anger and pleading. No, family doesn't treat each other that way. Goodbye, Mrs. Tyson, I said firmly and hung up before she could respond. The call shook me, but Saint was right there, his support unwavering. You did the right thing, Maeve. It's time they learn to stand on their own, he reassured me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Not long after settling back into our hometown, another surprise came our way. I was pregnant. The news brought a joy we hadn't expected, and suddenly the future seemed filled with possibilities. We decided it was time to sell my apartment and buy a small house in the suburbs near a good school where our child could grow up. As we were planning our move, another call came, again from Mrs. Tyson. Her tone was different this time, desperate and almost pitiful. Maeve, I've made a mistake. Joanna forced me to sell the house, took the money, and left me with nothing. Could I come and live with you and Saint? Her voice was shaky, pleading. The request stunned me. After everything, this was a test of my resolve. Mrs. Tyson, you chose this path when you sided with Joanna against us. You could have chosen differently, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I know I've made mistakes, but you have a kind heart. Can't you forgive an old woman for her wrong choices? She implored. I sighed, feeling a pang of pity, but remembering the pain her choices had caused. I forgave you long ago, but that doesn't mean I can let you back into my life. You need to live with the consequences of your actions, just as I have, I replied and ended the call. Then, with a resolute tap, I blocked her number. We moved forward with our plans, purchasing a quaint house with a little garden where our child could play. It was a lazy Sunday morning, the kind where you linger over coffee and the newspaper. I was flipping through the pages when a headline caught my eye: local woman arrested for massive fraud scheme. There, staring back at me from the paper, was Joanna, handcuffed and looking defeated. I couldn't help the mix of shock and, admittedly, a slight vindication that washed over me. "Look at this, Saint," I called out, holding up the newspaper for him to see. "It's Joanna. She's been arrested for fraud." Saint took the newspaper, scanning the article with a serious expression. "Wow. Can't say I'm surprised," he said, a hint of vindication in his voice too. The news about Joanna's consequences brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed until now. Over time, we learned through mutual friends that Mrs. Tyson was now living in a modest apartment, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her pension fell short of covering her living expenses and the debts Joanna had burdened her with. One evening, while Saint and I were hosting a backyard barbecue, his friend Warren broached the subject. "Did you hear about your mom?" he asked as Saint tended to the grill. "Yeah, I heard," Saint replied, his voice carrying a hint of sadness, but also a firm resolve. "She chose her path, Warren. It's tough, but that's how it is." Warren nodded, acknowledging the complex situation without pressing further. "You're right, man. Just thought you should know." The conversation soon drifted towards lighter topics, sports and work, as the evening unfolded. Life continued to move forward, and our joy deepened when we welcomed our daughter into the world. Becoming parents to Mia transformed everything. It shifted our priorities and dreams, and even seemed to heal old wounds by filling them with this new, overwhelming love. "Can you believe she's ours?" I whispered to Saint one night as we watched Mia sleeping peacefully in her crib. "She's perfect, Maeve." "Just perfect," Saint murmured back, his voice laden with emotion. We spent our days captivated by every one of Mia's milestones, each smile, each giggle. She was our little miracle. With her arrival, the pains of the past began to fade, making way for new, joyful memories. Each day was simple, yet it was rich with moments that wove together into a tapestry of a contented family life. This new chapter, marked by love and simplicity, showed us that while the past might shape us, the future was ours to define, filled with the promise of healing and the joy of a new beginning.
"You're my brother's wife. Everything you own belongs to us," came the voice of my sister-in-law, Catalina, over the phone. I stood there, gripping my phone tighter, anger bubbling up inside me. Carson was silent beside her, and I knew what they both wanted: my money, my time, my life. I had let this go on for too long. "Not anymore," I finally whispered. "I've already contacted the police." The line went quiet. They had no idea what was coming. "My name is Madeline, and I'm 31 years old. My husband, Carson, is 3 years older than me, and we've been married for 2 years. But lately, I feel like I want a divorce every single day. I am not compatible with my in-laws. My in-laws include my father-in-law, a company employee, my mother-in-law, a part-time worker, and my sister-in-law, Catalina, her husband, Miguel, and their 3 children who live within a 5-minute walk. By the way, my brother-in-law is currently working overseas alone. On the other hand, Carson and I are both full-time workers without children yet, and live in an apartment about an hour's drive from my in-laws. Going back to when we first met each other's families, I thought I could get along well with them when I saw how my in-laws praised me, spoke ill of their son, and joked around while laughing together. So, we got married. The wedding was satisfying for the invited guests. After that, we went on our honeymoon to Taiwan. There I met an elderly Canadian man at breakfast. I had lost this hotel guest benefit coupon and was going to buy souvenirs with it. I said to him, "We haven't used ours yet, and we have 2. Shall we give you one?" But for some reason, the old man's tone changed midway through our conversation, and he tried to leave. Carson was staring at him with a stern face before I knew it, and the old man left the restaurant. Carson shouted, "Why did you try to give that beggar something so easily?" I replied, "He didn't even ask for it, and we weren't going to use it anyway. He was just in trouble. Then my husband laughed unpleasantly and said, "There you go again, being a hero." I didn't mean it that way at all and was stunned by his words. I was preparing to hand over an envelope to that elderly gentleman before he checked out, but he wrote "blessings" in large letters on the envelope. I muttered to myself that it was too small and embarrassing for a human being. Although I was able to hand over the coupon to the front desk without any problems, I was in a cold war with Carson for a long time afterward. I didn't want to divorce him there, but I was worried about what would happen next, even on the plane ride back home. As soon as our newlywed life began, problems arose as expected. The problem was caused by Catalina. At the time of our marriage, my sister-in-law was expecting twins in 3 months. For some reason, my husband asked me, "Is it okay to give her your contact information? She has something to consult with you about." I couldn't imagine what she wanted to talk about, so I put off answering. However, during that time, Carson told me, "I already gave her your contact information." The next day, Catalina said to me, "I think we'll be relying on you for a lot of things from now on since we're family now. You know how hard it is to raise 3 children these days, don't you? If you're a full-time housewife like you are, you'll definitely be an asset. For now, keep your schedule free for 1.5 years, she added. When I asked her if she meant that I should help with child rearing, she laughed and said, "It's just something like an at-home job." She didn't listen to me after that. On that day when I told Carson, he said, "My sister is right. After all, you became a member of my family when we got married. She doesn't need to tell you in advance that she wants you to cooperate. If she doesn't have enough hands, can't she ask her mother or her husband's family for help?" I asked, bewildered. "It's useless to say that now. For the time being, it's your job to pick up and drop off the older child while Catalina is hospitalized," my husband concluded. "However, it takes an hour by car from my home to Catalina's house, or my parents-in-law's house. It would take half a day to travel back and forth every day to match the children's nursery school and return home. Even if Catalina and my parents-in-law do not understand remote work, I cannot understand why Carson allows his sisters rampage. Furthermore, you are a hero of justice, so of course you will help your sister-in-law who is in trouble," he said with a grin. I'm tired of Carson's persistence. The next day I went to my parents-in-law's house and decided to refuse everything about Catalina. The next day, my sister-in-law asked me to pick up and drop off her nephew immediately, but I objected to her. "I can't accept it because I have work and distance," I said firmly. However, my parents-in-law shamed me. "Don't you have any compassion? Didn't you learn from your parents? That's outrageous." They got angry. To me, who was surprised, my father-in-law said, "A wife is someone who serves her husband, her parents-in-law, and her sister-in-law, and lives to serve her ancestors. Fact is stranger than fiction." My parents-in-law saw my behavior and seemed to think that I had finally realized my mistake. My mother-in-law said, "That's fine. Please fulfill your duties as a wife properly." Including Carson's family, I was pressed to continue for 1.5 years. However, if I do so, it will take more than 4 hours for 2 round trips, which will greatly affect my work. When I told Carson, he convinced his parents and agreed to the condition that I would be exempt from helping until a month after giving birth, as he didn't want to lose his free assistance. 1 month has passed, and now my sister-in-law brings her 3 children to our house every weekend. The water is left running, the air conditioning is on in all rooms, the refrigerator is emptied, tissues are used up, and toilet paper is always gone. My precious metal products have disappeared. On top of that, Catalina takes my car without asking and goes out for her personal errands. If she wants to borrow it, she should at least inform me. My car insurance doesn't cover damages if someone else causes an accident, but she doesn't listen. The car is already scratched and dented. I sent an email to her husband, Miguel, but all I got was a read receipt with no reply. Then, Carson and Catalina started leaving their children with me while they went out. The playdates became more frequent, and I was left taking care of 3 children while trying to catch up on housework. One weekend, my sister-in-law left the children with me again and went out with my husband. On Monday, I went to the bank after Carson left for work. and I was shocked to see my account balance, which should have had $50,000, down to just 3 digits. After closer inspection, I found large sums had been withdrawn multiple times over the past 6 months. I reported the suspicion of fraudulent withdrawals and, after consulting with the bank, set up a trap to catch the culprit. The following weekend, Catalina left her children with me again and went out with Carson. My in-laws were also on a hot spring trip. They had the nerve to say, "You should learn about childcare for the future. You're lucky you can learn for free." The next day, after my in-laws went to the hot spring, my sister-in-law called me multiple times. When I didn't answer, she bombarded me with messages. Eventually, I answered, and she yelled, "I can't withdraw money." "What's going on?" I acted confused and said, "I don't understand what you're talking about." She kept cursing at me, and then Carson grabbed the phone, shouting, "This month was a bit tight because of some expenses. We didn't have enough credit available, so we decided to pay cash for this trip. But we can't withdraw any money now." I calmly asked, "First of all, whose account is it? Mine, right? Why is your sister trying to use my money without permission?" He went quiet, but then shouted, "That doesn't matter now. We can't pay for our stay at the inn like this. We don't even have money for the train back home." Then, my in-laws started chiming in from the background. "That's right. We'll talk about it when we get back home. Send some money to our son's account right away." Disgusted, I replied coldly, "You heard me, right? I can't transfer the money. I was forced to go to the police." The other end of the phone went silent, and after a long pause, they nervously asked, "Police? Why?" I laughed and said, "If someone withdraws money from my account without permission, it's normal to file a notice." Catalina must have heard me because she yelled, "You're my brother's wife, right? One's wife's stuff belongs to the family she married into, so it's okay for me and my family to use it. Don't you understand that?" I responded, "I don't understand such incoherent logic." Then my father-in-law started shouting, "There's no way stealing can happen between family members." And he was backed by my mother-in-law. "Of course it's not possible for theft to occur within a family," she added. I asked him, "Do you mean that theft between relatives is not punishable by law?" He confidently replied, "Of course. If you already know that, why even ask?" I immediately shot back, "My sister-in-law and I are not relatives living together, so we are not exempt." My father-in-law was speechless. Then Carson, frustrated, asked, "Are you planning on suing my sister?" I told him, "I will sue her as a victim and also consult about other items such as the precious metals Catalina took without permission, as they are theft victims too." My sister-in-law interrupted, "Do you have evidence of such things?" I replied, "Your flea market app account has already been identified, and records of items stolen from me were posted there. Some of them even have photos of warranty certificates, so they can be identified as mine immediately." She started crying upon hearing this. Then my husband, enraged, shouted, "How dare you make my sister cry? Apologize to her." I firmly responded, "I am a champion of justice and cannot overlook wrongdoing. And I'm preparing for divorce. You'll need to pay compensation and divide property properly." He laughed and said, "Divorce? Oh, I see. You're a hypocrite. You won't be able to beg me to stay and I won't pay any compensation. However," I calmly stated, "I have records and witnesses of how difficult it's been to continue married life due to you and your family. I'll expose everything in court." He shouted, "What do you mean by witnesses?" At that moment, the voice of Miguel, sitting in the passenger seat, spoke up through the phone. "It's me, your sister's husband. As a member of the family, I've seen and heard all of your misdeeds," he uttered. When I realized that money was being withdrawn from my account without my permission, the bank employee had told me, "If there's no record in the passbook, the possibility of the culprit being someone who can take out the cash card and know the PIN is high. In most cases like this, it's unfortunately done by family members," he concluded. So I came up with a plan and sent a usage statement of about $3,000 transferred from another account to the account that was used without permission, and I left it in a conspicuous place in the house. At the same time, I changed the PIN from the previous one. By doing this, even if my sister-in-law tried to withdraw money with the previous PIN, The cash card would be locked and unusable after 3 failed attempts. I thought of this as a trap to ruin all members of my husband Carson's family. When I found out that my bank account was being withdrawn from without my permission, the banker told me, if there is no record on your page, the possibility of the culprit being someone who can take out the cash card and know the PIN is high. In most cases like this, it's unfortunately done by family members. So, I came up with a plan and sent a usage statement of about $3,000, transferred from another account to the account that was used without permission, and left it in a conspicuous place in the house. At the same time, I changed the PIN from the previous one. By doing this, even if Catalina tried to withdraw money with the previous PIN, the cash card would be locked and unusable after 3 failed attempts. I thought of this as a trap to ruin all members of Carson's family. I also left an in pamphlet together with it, and said to my sister-in-law, the hot spring view here is also great, but payment is cash only. It's rare these days, isn't it? Carson and she were grinning at that time, so I was laughing too. Then I sent a long message and photos to Catalina's husband Miguel by email. I exposed one after another that Catalina was leaving her children entirely up to me, not doing laundry or cleaning when I wasn't taking care of them, that her unsanitary house was where the children were staying, and that my parents-in-law were condoning it without reproaching her. Then Miguel immediately replied, I've taken leave from work because of this family crisis. I've been harboring various complaints and suspicions about my wife's handling of the children for some time. My sister-in-law then objected, don't make so much noise. I'll divorce you, but I won't give you custody. Miguel had no choice but to remain silent. Then Miguel and I cooperated with each other and consulted lawyers respectively. I decided to claim compensation for misappropriated money and personal belongings, alimony and property division, while he decided to win custody of their children through divorce. When Miguel calmly spoke about this over the phone, Catalina was screaming on the other side of his smartphone while he said, do you think you can get away with this just like that? He laughed at her and said, I found something interesting when I investigated your family background. You left your children with me and went to nightclubs all night long. She was speechless. I thought it was terrible for siblings who have families to leave their children with someone else and stay up all night, but I never thought they were such stupid people. I told Miguel that my luggage had already been moved out of our apartment, and that since this apartment was treated as a company dormitory, the cleaning company would come in next week, so he should leave immediately. Then I handed it over to Miguel again. He took the children to his parents' home and had no intention of letting Catalina see them. Furthermore, the house where she lived was in Miguel's name, so he would sell it urgently and told her to leave immediately. We blocked all communication channels. Although Catalina and Carson, who wanted to avoid divorce as much as possible, said they wanted to come back right away, apparently they couldn't check out because they couldn't pay for their stay at the inn. In the end, they were suspected of eating and drinking without paying for their stay at the inn and were reported to the police. After being severely scolded by them, they signed a memorandum promising to pay as soon as they returned home and managed to return home by taking ordinary trains. However, as promised, they left only divorce papers behind, and apparently everyone was exhausted after seeing Catalina's house and apartment become empty shells after that. Thanks to a capable lawyer, I received a lump sum payment of compensation, and both Miguel and I divorced. It seems that Miguel also won custody of their children safely. On the other hand, my former parents-in-law were begged by Carson and Catalina to let go of their family home and use that money to repay compensation and misappropriated money. Of course, that alone was not enough, so both my former sister-in-law and former husband borrowed money and became guarantors. Furthermore, since the bills for the nightclubs they attended were quite high, both of them are working day and night to pay off their debts. As for me, I'm tired of marriage for a while. I want to focus on taking care of myself for now, including the time I wasted dealing with my ex-husband.